Alright, I've got all the arches milled into the upper rails of our bookcases now. And if you remember from the design, I've got three arches. Two of these arches are going to be built into the same kind of a narrower but double wide bookcase. And then this longer arch is going to be built into the bookcase that's going to go on the right side of the fireplace. I'm going to be putting pocket holes just on the left or the right. You just have to be careful not to gouge the edge of the arch or go too far toward the bottom here of the arch so that your pocket hole doesn't gouge into that. So three should be plenty on each of these. Alright, I've got all the pocket holes now drilled in the arched rails. And before I go ahead and assemble this, one thing that I have to do is the same thing that I did to the base cabinets. One of the stiles on each of the bookcases has to be milled with a 30 to 45 degree angle on one of the edges that is going to touch the wall. And this is so that it makes it much easier for me to scribe. Okay, I've got the bevel now cut in the piece that I want. So I don't know if you can see this, but it's about on the 45. It leaves, I don't actually try to cut it right up to the edge of the board. I actually leave like maybe a 32nd inch of space. So I don't always 45 like right up to the edge. I believe that this is fine, plus it gives it a little bit more of a clean edge when you sand, if there are places that you don't have to sand. But anyway, since these bookcases are going to be painted, it's really nothing. You can also, you know, if there's only a small gap, what I tend to do on the job site is I go and I take a piece of board and I put it up against the wall, and if it's really not bad at all, I mean, we may be able to put a little bit of caulk in there and paint right over it, and then that absorbs the gap as well. So there are multiple ways of doing it, but I'm expecting there to be, you know, maybe 3/16 to a 1/4 inch gap in here, and so that's too big for caulk in my mind, so we do it this way to scribe. In any case, I use glue anyway for any of the joints that I can. Obviously on the pre-finished plywood, you can't do that, and you just need a little bit of glue. And since these are going to be painted, I'm not worried. I mean, I'll clean off the excess glue, but I'm not worried if the glue gets into the pores of the wood as much. So I put it on my table that I know is flat here at the end, line it up flush, go ahead and just put on the face frame clamp really. Oh, slipped out of flush, which, you know, happens from time to time. So let's get it in there and done. Alright, then I'm just going to take 1 1/4 inch coarse thread screws. Again, softwoods are better for the coarse threaded screws. The fine threaded screws are better for the harder woods. Okay, I've got the glue pretty much, so I'm going to go ahead and just let this set up a little bit before I sand it, but I'll come back with a random orbit sander and basically sand these things until they're all, you know, very smooth with one another. If your boards are, you know, equal thickness, fortunately I have a thickness planer in the shop, so if there's, even with the 1x stock that you might pick up at the store, there can be subtle variations. Most of them you don't have to worry about, you can kind of sand them out, but some of them, this one was so bad it was like almost a 1/16 of an inch thicker. The 1x8 was about that I got was about a 1/16 of an inch thicker, and that had to be planed down. So anyway, that happened. So while this sets up, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same process on the wider cabinet that's going to go on the right side of our built-in. All right, I've got my arches done behind me. You can see here, the larger one is facing you, the double one is facing the other way. And now I'm kind of ready to start putting together the bookcase carcasses. These are going to be actually pretty straightforward. We've done the same thing in the videos where we did the base cabinets. I'm effectively going to do pocket holes. So this is like inside of one, right? So I'm going to do pocket holes along the back here toward the front, so that I can attach my face frames, and I'm gonna do this on 3 of the 5 bookcase boards. And if you're confused about the fifth one, that's actually the panel that goes over the end. On the top pieces, because there are no bottoms, because the bookcase is going to sit basically flush on top of the counter that it's going to be resting on, the counter piece. In the top, there only are top pieces, and I'm basically just going to put pocket holes on 3 sides so that I can anchor the left and the right bookcase sides, as well as the front top rail, the arched rail, the face frame. I've got my 2 side pieces, my top piece, and the 2 cleats that I'm going to be using to assemble this. In this situation, I'm going to construct this with the front of the bookcase facing down. So what I'm going to do is simply what I have done before, and that is to make sure that the front edge of the side and the front edge of the top are flush with respect to one another. It takes a little while to finesse these things together, and that's totally fine. Now what I'm going to do is install the top cleat, and I'm going to show you a different method. Now normally when I install cleats like this, I also put pocket holes toward the top such that when this gets pushed below the surface, I screw the pocket holes into the side of the case as well as to the top of the case. But some of you have asked the question of, why do I have to use pocket holes for these types of operations as opposed to doing, you know, say screwing in from the side? And the answer really is there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. And in fact, I've done it that way many years, and we're going to be doing that again in the future. It's just kind of one of those things where, hey, I've got the pocket hole. If you have a pocket hole machine or you have just a regular pocket hole jig, you're just cruising along making pocket holes. Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense to stop to do something else. Alright, so then I'm going to take and do the same thing I did with these cleats. And if you're going to put 2 pieces together, like I'm going to show you here, I do have a preferred attachment method that I like. And I prefer to use confirmat screws. They're spelled C-O-N-F-I-R-M-A-T. And if you've used them before, I mean, they're wonderful, wonderful devices. If you can look at them, there's a couple of things that are unique with them. One is they don't have a point on the top, so you definitely need to pre-drill these, and there's a special bit that comes along with that. And then the other thing is you'll see that the shoulders are kind of like a wood screw. It's missing some of the threads all the way to the top. And when you, and these come in millimeter, these are basically 1.5 inches. It's 5 millimeter by 40 millimeter. I always have to remember by labeling everything. But essentially when you don't have these threads up here, the top piece of wood that you're screwing through to attach to the other piece of wood is able to kind of float because it's got no threads holding it in place. And when it can float, then the screw can actually pull it much tighter to the surface. Now, I really like these confirmat screws. The other thing is drywall screws or other types of screws that you're putting into plywood or MDF don't hold very well because sometimes, and I know if you've been working with plywood, you've felt this, even in the pocket hole screws, it spins. Like you'll get to a point where you think it should be tightening up, but it just flows and spins normally, and that it doesn't mean that it's not the greatest hold. It still has the threads throughout, so it's going to hold somewhat, but it's better that it doesn't spin. These confirmat screws, I have yet to spin one of these in a hole that's been drilled and in any plywood or MDF. So that's one benefit of using these confirmat screws. They're really they're more expensive for sure, and they do require a special drill bit. And I even have the drill bit labeled in here, written confirmat on it, so that I don't mistake it with another one. But it allows you to basically bury the head of the screw into the top of the wood. Now I'm just going to show you. For this thing, it's very easy. I just go ahead and put it there, make sure it's countersunk, and then I'll put it in here like so. Never spins. I mean, it's rock solid. Basically what I need to do now is just make sure that, most important is that the bottoms are flush. The bottom sides should be flush to the bottom of the face frame pieces, and then everything needs to be a 1/2 inch. Whenever I build these types of bookcases, I always want to make sure that I have a 1/2 inch overlay of the face frame over the side of the bookcase so that my shelves aren't going to come out. And again, it's just a standard unit of measurement that I adopted. Could it be 3/8? Sure, it could be 3/8, but the math isn't as comfortable there. So I'm going to just make sure, I'm going to take a while and I'm going to go ahead and just measure it around and make sure I've got a 1/2 inch on either side here, you know, and then make sure I'm snug and flush at the bottom before I drive everything home. Okay, now that I have the one side of the bookcase anchored to the face frame, it's time to do the other side. And as I said before, you don't really need the pocket hole screws on the one side because it's going to be touching another side and you won't be able to get at it anyway. So let's just put this on here for just a test fit. Okay, all you see me doing now is basically just putting glue, you know, all over kind of the inside. I just like this when I can do it. You know, it's not critically necessary, but I am going to like basically bind these things together using a few pin nails. Now you can use screws if they're small head screws and they're behind the, you know, and if they're small head screws and they're set behind the face frame, you can certainly use screws to put the two sides of the bookcase together. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a pin nailer that I have. It's a brad nailer, actually, not a pin nailer, but it's 1.5 inches. You know, 1.25 inch pin nails. You don't want more than 1.5, rather, because you don't want to pierce the other side. And I'm just going to start by kind of putting them in like so, just so that I can get a little bit of a bite into here, so that these things will kind of stay together. Alright, now all of my pocket screws are in all the way around, in the tops and the sides, particularly with this one side anchored and this other side basically just nailed, you know, for strength to this side. And I'm ready now to kind of cut the back. So the unfortunate part about the back pieces is, and this is where you get a lot of extra leftover stuff, I would love to have been able to put a full sheet of plywood right across the back, but I'm about 2 inches too short here with respect to using a whole sheet. So I have to basically cut the plywood about 25 inches. I'm going to make mine a little bit less, like 24 and 15/16 on each side. It doesn't matter if it hangs over a little on this side. You could do them 25 and call it a day, but that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to get those cut, and then what I'm going to do is square up the cabinet. If you haven't seen the square up tutorial that I did on how to square cabinets, we're going to be using a jig to square these things up. There's a good video in our skill builder section, so if you go to our channel's front page, I guess, there's a series called Skill Builders, and there's a video in there about squaring up cabinets. And when I look at this cabinet here, now that I've got everything together, essentially what I'm getting on one side is 80 5/16, and then for the other diagonal, you know, what I'm getting is 80 7/16. So that's basically 1/8 of an inch out of square. That's too much for me. I don't want to be a 1/16. It can be forgiven, but for me 1/8 is too much. So I'm going to try to bring this into square using our 90-degree angle jigs and basically just pinching the long side together. But in order to do that, I've got to get the back pieces cut and ready to assemble so that once it's square, I can just go ahead and staple them on. Okay, in terms of squaring up this project, what I actually did to test it out was I put a long bar clamp on the top, which if you've seen the squaring up cabinets video, if you haven't seen that, you should go back and watch it, because I give you 3 methods of squaring up cabinets, and one of the least desirable is actually to put a bar clamp. First of all, you have to have a bar clamp that's long enough, and then you have to set it on the edge, and then you have to try to get a tape measure here, and unless you have somebody on the other end, it's kind of tough to adjust. So there are better ways, and one of the ways I showed you in the square up video under our skill building section is to go ahead and put these 90-degree angle braces on each corner, the longer corner, and then squeeze them in. The problem with that is now I would have to put some kind of a board in here, because we don't have a bottom to our cabinet because these are bookcases, and so the bottom would simply just squeeze in without squaring the cabinet, and in fact we would kind of put at risk the work we've done here, because I don't want anything to split or crack. I could put a spacer board in there temporarily to do it, but we were 1/8 of an inch out of square, so that means all I have to do is get something in a 1/16 of an inch. And when I actually just tried this before I turned the camera on, I put the bar clamp, or the pipe clamp rather, on the strong side here, and when I tightened it down, it came into square and it didn't move back out of square. So we're exactly square where we need to be here, so I'm going to skip the squaring section. It's very critical that your cabinets are square, particularly when you're doing built-in bookcases. You don't want something that looks like it's leaning. So in any case, if you haven't seen the video, like I said, go back and watch the video. It's very interesting. I guarantee you'll learn something if you watch that video. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and because one piece of 48-inch wide plywood, 1/4-inch plywood, is not going to stretch over the back. Because it's about 3 inches too short or something. It's like, that's a real bummer. But anyway, I've got the separate pieces here. I've gone ahead and primed them. On this project, I'm just using a shellac-based primer. I typically do on poplar and things. You can certainly use an oil-based primer, that's too. The shellac-based primer dries so fast, so it's really, really awesome. And I've sanded them all up already. You can see there's a little bit of powder on there. That's okay. And you can also see here that on the back I have taped off these edges so that I can make sure that the glue sticks from this surface to this surface. And there's my dog barking. But in any case, I've left a little bit at the edge here so I can glue along the bottom and a little edge at the top. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do these one at a time. I've got the second panel behind here, and I'm going to go ahead and just take some of the glue, and I'm going to spread it around the edges, and then I'm going to go and flip it over, line it up to where it needs to be square. So I'm going to make it flush on this edge. So on the edge that's going to be scribed on the wall, which is, I don't know if you can see that very well here, this is the edge that's going to be against the wall that needs to be scribed. I don't care if it hangs over a little bit or whatever, it's not going to interfere with anything. But on the edge on this side, we have to make sure that it's at least flush. I cut these a little bit short, like a 1/16 inch short on both sides. And so that is, I don't want any overhang on this side, because when we're done putting on the backs, I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing to the side that's going to be facing outward toward the living room, if you will. And then the other thing I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned in the previous video, is I cut these things 5/8 of an inch long. And the reason I do that is because sometimes the technique I use is to basically slip the back end here behind the actual counter. And I'll show you that technique when we go to install, but suffice it to say for now that I need this about 5/8 inch longer than the bottom of the actual bookcases. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this up, And what I'm going to be using here to put these things in together is a crown stapler. You can use nails or brads if you want to, and this is where I kind of get you know, to start using some pneumatic tools, and I realize not all of you have pneumatic tools with which to kind of do this project, but it's suffice it to say that at least at this point you want to use something that's a little bit broader, and a crown staple is a little bit broader than a brad nail, and the reason you do that is because the 1/4-inch plywood is much thinner, obviously, compared to a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch piece. And you know, it can have a tendency to pop loose if you're somehow moving the cabinet, and you don't want that to happen, so we use the crown staples. Okay, on each of the cabinets that we have, one side is going to be facing the wall and one side is going to be facing the interior of the room. And so in order for me to use the width of the stiles that I've used, it's easily remedied by some 1/2 inch spacer blocks that I'm going to tack in here with just some brad nails, and then we're going to be able to put the board up like so, and it's going to come flush with the, you know, with the edge of the stile. Now, okay, now what I'm going to do is just make sure, you know, my panel is resting against them. And I do have some space here. Now, there's two options that you can use. If the space is significant and you don't have anything thinner, you can rip down, you know, shims that are a little bit thinner. So let me grab some of these. So, you know, these are just scraps I had, so I trimmed them down. You can get them down, if you have a planer, you can get them down to a 1/16. And then, you know, these are like an 1/8 inch, 1/16 inch, somewhere in there. And I can just see kind of, just as a look, you know, how I am. And that's actually like really good right there. You know, it's perfectly good there. Or the other option you have, if it's only like a 1/16 or less, then what you can do is use a laminate trimmer, and I use probably this more than almost any other router that I have in the shop. And basically what this is it's just small. They call it a laminate trimmer because typically you use it with laminate countertops, but it can be used with any edge. And you can see here that this one is already chucked with the bit that I would use. And it's got a bearing here that rides on the surface of the wood, and then it's got a bit here and that is going to trim down the excess of what I need. So if this stile is sticking out above this, then I'm going to do this anyway, but I'm saying you could do it now if you wanted, but I don't want to take that much material off of the stile in case it looks, you know, a little strange or not even. But you would take this laminate trimmer and you would just run it along that. The wheel bearing will ride against the plywood here, and the trimming portion of the bit, the cutting portion of the bit, will inevitably leave this edge absolutely flush with this. Now when you're doing it, it's very critical that you have just enough of the cutting bit exposed to hit the bottom of the stile. It's critical that you don't overcut and mar this face, because it is plywood, and then you'd have to do repair work on it. And at least on a painted surface, it's a little easier to do repair. But on a you know, cherry surface, or if you use a mahogany plywood or something like that, God forbid, that would be disastrous. So we're going to end up using the laminate trimmer after that. So I'm going to go ahead and fit a couple of these pieces on here, these shims, and then we'll run this over with a nice laminate edge, or with a laminate trimmer to leave it a nice edge, and that'll be that. Bond. you know, I try to put glue whenever I can. So actually, I'm going to put glue on these things too. These are shims on here. And that's okay. You want to put a little bit of glue there. I want to make sure that this edge right here, especially that I'm dealing with, is flush with the bottom of this bottom edge of the stile. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a couple of nails at the bottom here to hold it, and then I'm just going to make sure that I can kind of wedge this, you know, all the way as I can. Alright, finally at the top now I'm able to put in some screws, and what I want to do is, since I've got these confirmat screws, I really like the confirmat screws. They're way better than drywall screws for plywood and everything. So as I mentioned before, it does come with a special bit that you need to drill, and you just want to be careful, you know, not to drill too far. So I'm going to go ahead and put like 3 screws in there. It's above the place where my crown molding is going to go, so that will hide those screws. Okay, well that's done. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my laminate trimmer. It's a little baby router. It does come in handy. I use it all the time to do like rounded over edges or small chamfers that you want, or even some cove type of, you know, mill work on there or something like that. But in any case, what we're going to do is I could spend the time to try to sand this down, but that would take an awful long time for me to get this, you know, if I can even get a fingernail under there, which I can, it's going to take an awful long time to get, you know, this down to match this. And again, it's not as important on, you know, plywood that's going to be painted, but on any plywood you want to be careful you don't sand too much, otherwise you'll burn through the veneer and you'll get exposed underlayment through the wood, and you don't really want that. But in any case, I've got this set up already to the depth that I need. Actually, it needs to go a little bit lower. I should have said that. I had done it on one edge already. And so let's just set it up here and get it a little bit lower. Right about there. And I think that'll be good. And that's literally, it's a little dusty, I know. There's a lot of people who are looking out for my lungs. I do appreciate that. Usually have more windows open and everything, but for that quick route, and then we'll come back with a little bit of glue that we'll put in here and we'll finish this. But this little router, I mean, is perfect for that. It's perfectly flush, and it's going to be just fine. And it's a quick way to remove some overstock. That's why I tend to build the face frames a little bit longer, or a little bit wider, and I have that 16th. I do this quite a bit. Now, we didn't really do this on the kitchen as much. We tried to get right flush with it, with what we could, but that's okay because we used different size styles, so there really wasn't a need to, you know, kind of go over this. So it was totally fine. Now, so this thing is essentially done. I'm going to go ahead and sand and prime the rest of it, and then what I'm going to do is go back to the base cabinet, and I need to do this exact same process to that base cabinet on each side of both base cabinets. But